to speak with our speakers today from INVANTI. But yes, I just really want to thank you guys for coming, and hopefully we're going to have these every semester, and hopefully in the future they will be in person, about various topics within social entrepreneurship and innovation, and we'll keep you informed about when those will happen. First, just we'll have everyone on mute, and if you had any questions, post them in the chat. My name is Jennifer Krauser. Some of you have met me if you're considering the social entrepreneurship and innovation minor. I work in the Pulte Institute for Global Development, and yeah, this is one of my fun activities working with students. Today, I'm going to introduce our co-directors of the Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation minor. That is Professor Melissa Paulson and Professor Mike Morris, who are here today. They are esteemed colleagues of mine I have a privilege of working with, and as co-directors, they really bring in a great combination to the minor. With Professor Paulson, she leads the Entrepreneurship and Education Division at the Pulte Institute for Global Development. She is my supervisor, so I have to play nice, but she's wonderful. She teaches our two foundational courses in Social Entrepreneurship Innovation minor. She's teaching one right now. Some of you might be in her class. That is our Intro to Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation class. And then in the fall, she'll be teaching our Human-Centered Design for Social Innovation class. More about that later. But also she does a variety of other things, including manages a whole bunch of training programs for international and domestic, depending on the grants that we are plugged into. So Professor Mike Morris is our other co-director for Social Entrepreneurship and Innovation minor. He has a joint appointment with the Pulte Institute and the McKenna Center for Human Development and Global Business. He is the founder and director of the South Bend Entrepreneurship and Adversity Program. He'll talk a little bit more about that later. He's authored 13 books and contributed to international entrepreneurship and pedagogical works in his career at more than 4 universities, I found, Mike. Please stand me if I'm corrected. But he specializes in entrepreneurship specifically as a tool to eradicate poverty or to overcome adversity. So we really have a great breadth from these two co-directors. I will now hand it over to Melissa Paulson, who will be introducing our speakers from INVANTI today.
I think you're muted there, Melissa.
I thought I got unmuted. Thank you very much. So nice to see everyone, seeing some familiar faces from class, and thanks for joining us. I'm privileged to introduce not just our esteemed kind of guests, but also great friends of mine. So I'll start with Dustin and leave Maria for the most important slot, as you'll figure out as we talk over time. But Dustin is the co-founder of INVANTI. You'll learn a lot about INVANTI in the next few minutes. He's a 3-time graduate of Notre Dame. He holds a bachelor's in civil engineering, a master's in civil engineering, couldn't get enough of that, and then a master's from the Engineering, Science, Technology, and Entrepreneurship Excellence Program, which otherwise known as ESTEAM. When he was a graduate student, he was the co-founder of Engineering to Empower, or E2E, an initiative looking at innovative approaches to housing and home ownership in post-earthquake Haiti. And after graduating from the ESTEAM program, Dustin moved to Leogane, Haiti, and lived and worked there for 2 years, building housing prototypes, training local construction crews, and working with members to find new ways to approach community-level problems. He returned back to the US in 2015, and he and Maria kind of checked in and found that they had a common interest in human-centered design and problem solving. And they co-founded INVANTI, which has been around for the last 3 years.
Almost four.
And which catalyzes entrepreneurs to solve important problems and by helping them navigate the discovery and launch phases of entrepreneurship and connecting them to impact motivated capital. He just FYI, he still is attached to entrepreneurship or Engineering to Empower. So if you have any questions about that as well, I'm sure he would be happy to answer. I'll move over to Maria. Maria has a bachelor's in civil engineering. There's a bit of a common theme here from Duke University, and she received her PhD 2.5 years ago from Notre Dame in civil engineering. And her research was focused on developing a human-centered approach to wind mitigation of long-span footbridges. Obviously, she's the co-founder of INVANTI, but previously she was the operations and research coordinator for an international nonprofit organization called Bridges to Prosperity, which creates access to healthcare, education, and markets by teaching communities how to build footbridges over impassable rivers. She also serves on the board of directors for the organization, and she was recently, I'm not so sure how recent is, but within the past couple of years, recognized with the Duke Young Alumni Service and Leadership Award, and for her work with Bridges to Prosperity. So just—
Are you calling her not so young anymore, Melissa?
No, I meant not so. Thanks very much. So just wanted to say thanks very much to Maria and Dustin for being with us today. And maybe we'll get started with some questions. So our format today will be more like I'll be answering or asking a few questions. You guys will be responding, but we want this to be more of a dialogue. And for our participants, we'd be happy for you to start putting any questions that you might have in the chat. And we want to give you as much information as you're looking for. We're a smallish group, and we really like to have a dialogue here. So maybe I can start with the first question for you, Maria and Dustin, and that is, what sparked INVANTI? Like, where did this idea come from? How did you go from engineering peers, colleagues in your graduate work to co-founding INVANTI?
It's a long and winding story that I will not bore everybody with, but I guess just like the the quick version. So I was doing my PhD, as Melissa mentioned, in looking at how do we make long span footbridges safe in wind. And in the process, I was spending a lot of time in communities in mostly in Nicaragua, but also Rwanda and some in Haiti. And was getting really frustrated that kind of the state of the art in engineering to make these bridges safe already existed. But it just didn't make sense in the context of a rural community. You can't just take like the tune mass damper off of the Golden Gate Bridge and plop it down kind of in a much smaller community. But at the same time that I was trying to think of like, okay, how do we get creative about ways to make these bridges safe? I just realized like I did not have the context I needed to know what was going to work, what was not going to work. So that was my kind of foot in the door for design thinking. And over in Haiti, Dustin was coming up against some of the similar constraints as he was working on earthquake resistant housing in Haiti, trying to figure out what are some of the design details, how do we do financing? Again, he came up with the same thing, which is like, I know enough to know that I'm not the person probably who's in the best position to understand the context that's going to let me design a good solution. So he was also kind of exploring some things around design thinking. And then he started something called innovation. What did you call them, Dustin? Innovation
Clubs.
Innovation clubs. Or no, before that, the week-long.
Oh, the innovation incubators.
Innovation incubator, which basically said like, if design thinking usually works where a team of people who know this process of interviewing people, getting to insights, designing solutions, getting feedback, iterating, and then building things, usually that's like an outside team of experts in design thinking who are coming into a context they're not familiar with, learning a lot from having conversations, but then they're going somewhere else, they're doing the design. And these people who understand the problem are not really very active in actually creating the solution. So Dustin said, what if we flip that on our head? What if we find people who are naturally curious and innovative, who live in Leogan, who would be the people living in the houses we're trying to design? And instead of us interviewing them, what if we just give them some basic design thinking tools and then give them basically the power to do this process themselves and come up with and test things? And so he solved a few problems he had around his housing model with that. I actually came and helped him out during one of those innovation incubators. And one of the interesting things that started happening is after these week-long design sessions, we would have people who came back and they would say, that was really cool. Happy I could help you with your little house thing. But I would be really interested to use this process to think of an idea for a new business. So can you help me apply this process to come up with an idea for a business. And we both found that very interesting. And that was the beginning of, Dustin alluded to these innovation clubs. So we helped kind of get these little clubs organized where people were basically surfacing problems within their communities using some of the tools that we developed to try to get to solutions. But that really planted the seed of saying, like, what happens if you kind of get rid of this myth of the aha moment? So like this idea that to be a great entrepreneur, you have to have this like lightning strike aha moment. I don't know about you guys. Some people are ideas people. I'm sure some of you are ideas people. I am not. I don't have ideas, great or bad, just like strike me randomly. And I always kind of had associated with entrepreneurship. Oh, entrepreneurs, those are people who have great ideas. I do not usually have great ideas, but here I am. But so that was kind of the seed for INVANTI, which says, what if you find people who have some entrepreneurial instincts? So the kinds of people who start things, maybe they haven't started companies before, but they start clubs and activist groups. And they have deep understandings of problems that affect them directly and their communities. And what if instead of waiting for those people to have ideas until you supported them to build companies, what if you actually bet on them before they have ideas and give them a process to explore problems they're connected to, hunt around until they find an opportunity that really matches something that they care about, and then turn that into a structured brainstorm where we'll come up with 100 different ideas for solutions and business models, and then help them kind of get that thing off the ground. So that was the genesis of INVANTI. The first version of it was very hands-on and US based. So kind of had this thesis that more people live in cities like South Bend than cities like San Francisco or New York. But if you look at a lot of the startups that we see in the news and getting funding, those startups are often solving problems for a very small group of people who disproportionately live in those big cities. So we say, hey, we're here in South Bend. People in our community have really important things that they're struggling with every day, whether that's finding a good paying job, childcare, transportation, financial health. Why don't we see more startups aimed at those kinds of problems? And our kind of take on why was that the kind of people who understand those problems best, the people who live here and experience these problems, don't often get the shot to start something. So V1 of INVANTI, we literally paid people to quit their jobs and either stay in South Bend or move to South Bend. And we paid them for 6 months to basically explore problems, lots of different problems, and eventually get to ideas for companies and then help them launch. So that was the first version. Dustin, you can explain kind of where it went from there.
Yeah, so we'll probably get into this later, but like things have changed a lot for us, especially with the pandemic. But we've shifted a little bit to basically saying, instead of having this be an in-person model where people have to quit their jobs and move here, could we actually bring this process to basically anybody who wanted to access it? So we are now what we call a virtual startup studio. So basically we look for people who, as Maria described, like have some entrepreneurial traits, but don't necessarily have an idea yet, and try to help them through the process of, we say, going from pre-idea to pilot. So something that they're testing to see if it could be a business. We do that all online, almost entirely asynchronously now, where people are allowed to join and can start going through this process. We have other elements of how we help them do that with like structured sprints to help people stay accountable to making progress, and then kind of a community aspect to it as well. But the basic idea remains the same as what Maria talked about, where our kind of view or thesis on impact is that one of the reasons that we don't see as many people starting the kind of companies that would really affect everybody's daily lives, especially in communities like ours, is they're not the ones starting businesses. So if we could help more of those people start businesses, you might actually start to see different types of businesses that work better for people, both the people that work for them, but also the end customers of whatever they do. So our goal is try to find people who want to start things and just don't know what that is yet, and help them to kind of thoughtfully think through both what is the best thing for them to start, but then where does that kind of match up with something they really care about and something they could have impact doing.
I'm reminded that I think it was a year ago at this time that you were talking to my social entrepreneurship class, and you were asking them, what should we do? You know, like if you were in our shoes and you were an in-person, kind of human-centered design on steroids in a physical form, what would you do now? And so it's great to hear about the progress that has taken place. Maybe two questions that I have. One is, kind of really, I think you've done a great job of sharing how it's a kind of a pre-startup, or at least you're trying to get people to start up. But oftentimes when we in entrepreneurship, we hear about, kind of the incubators and the accelerators, and we hear about Techstars, which we'll share a video of a couple of your folks who have gone through Techstars in Chicago or in, some of them in Silicon Valley. How do you complement, what is traditionally known as the, kind of the incubator, the accelerator, or do you in some ways replace some of that?
Yeah, so go ahead, Maria.
I was just say, like, the single biggest way that we see ourselves differently from all of those other things is that we are building relationships with people, and we are trying to support them to start whatever it is that they should start. And that could include starting multiple things, pausing things, turning around, finding something else. Compared to things like incubators, accelerators, even funders, they're funding ideas that have people attached to them. So their interest is in a particular idea. Usually that idea has to have already had some traction. So they have to have some validation around the idea. And their interest in supporting that founder is basically completely connected to a particular idea. So if a founder learns that, hey, I'm not actually really passionate about this anymore, or the idea doesn't work out, that support is now gone. You go back out into the wilderness, hope you come up with another idea, get it to a point where then you can kind of re-engage with those other things. So we see ourselves as kind of a home base for people, and particularly people who may not even initially self-identify as entrepreneurs, but we want to really be there to first ask the questions of, like, who are you and what do you care about? And then help you work through how do you turn that into something that could be a business that could kind of support yourself and potentially grow, and then build that kind of however you want to. So we're not at all concerned with a particular idea, and we're not timed bound. So it's not like an 8-week program. Like, we want to be with you for as long as you are actively or passively thinking about starting something.
The other big difference, and this has changed a lot, but traditionally, especially accelerators, usually are attached to funding as well. So typically they will give you some amount of funding in exchange for some, they call it equity in the company, so some ownership stake in the company. And the way those accelerators make money is if your business goes on to be successful and eventually sells or goes public, they get money for that ownership stake that they had. So those accelerators are typically, like, they're investing in a very narrow type of business. And it's neither good or bad. It's just a certain set of incentives by the way that they fund things. And so you'll typically see accelerators going after businesses that can be super high growth, super high margin, looking to, like, completely, dominate a market. These are like the Ubers of the world, like the kind of traditional tech companies, because of the way that they fund them. And so we're trying to create a system where we're worried more about founder business fit. So instead of saying, hey, you should start a business that can go really fast and be this huge success, like, if that's the right fit for you, awesome, let's do that. But it could also be that you have a different path, and maybe you don't want to give up ownership of your company, or maybe you want to be a predominantly employee-owned company, or maybe you want to fund it a different way. We're more, because of the stage that we start at, we can have a little bit more flexibility with how we help people start things and reflect on the kind of business they want to start. And we're trying to create our incentives such that we can optimize for the best fit as opposed to a very narrow type of business.
So can you talk about some of the businesses that have come out of your model? There's a plethora of questions that we can ask, and we unfortunately have limited time, but how do you fund yourselves? You talk about paying entrepreneurs, but how do you get paid? What's the, what are some of these enterprises or ideas that have been generated or spurred out of your startup studio? And so just to try to make it a little bit more concrete for our audience here.
Dustin, you want to cover, like, maybe increment and hurry home, and then I can get into a business model?
Yeah, so I'll give you two examples. So one company that came out of the first cohort that we we did was founded by actually a team, so two people who met in our cohort, John and Jada, company called Hurry Home, which is an affordable housing startup. And the idea behind Hurry Home is there's homes in cities like South Bend that you can actually buy for, let's say, less than $80,000, which is very different than, like the affordable housing crisis in San Francisco. The problem with these homes is people could afford to buy them and could actually it could be more affordable than the rent that they're currently paying. But in order to buy them, they would need a mortgage, and banks have a really hard time making mortgages on these houses that are under $80,000. Basically, the bank's business model doesn't allow them to make enough money on that transaction. So they stay away from doing it, and they're incentivized to go after bigger mortgages. So you have these homes that are like there that people could own and earn equity in these homes and actually also save money on a monthly basis from the rent that they're currently paying, but they have this financing gap. And so Hurry Home looked at how could they take this system that existed and kind of exists now, which is a thing called seller financing, but it's kind of predatory. It's really disaggregated, a lot of bad actors, and try to like formalize it and make the incentives really good such that people could get financing for these homes, get into them, and start earning an ownership stake in an asset as opposed to just paying rent. A second company that we helped start out of our second cohort by a woman named Jess has a big interest. She comes from a technology background, but has a big interest in workforce development and automation and its effect, especially on blue collar jobs. Moved to South Bend and went and toured over 100 small and mid-sized manufacturing plants in our region, which is like basically the economic base of Northern Indiana, and realized that automation was changing a lot of jobs. But when you ask the supervisors and the owners about how they were thinking about upskilling employees to be able to work with new machinery or new technologies, they would say that traditionally, like they were having a skill problem. They couldn't hire enough good people, but they actually don't know what that skills gap actually is. So they couldn't tell you how many of these positions do I need? And then if I do need those positions, what training program should I go pay for such that I see a return on that training, both for my employees and for the business. And so Jessica is starting a company called Increment, which is basically helping manufacturing companies quantify the return on investment by investing in their employees. And this is all by creating basically skills and training data at the employee level such that they can learn like best paths through the company for the employees that both provide wage bumps for employees, but also provide a way to keep employees on and retention, which saves money for employers and eventually also pays off in our ROI sense. So not the quote unquote sexiest of businesses. Like these are just the hard, we call them kitchen table problems, like the things that people worry about: good paying jobs, housing, childcare, how do I get to work? How do I make sure I have enough money saved in the bank to weather an emergency? Like these kinds of issues are the issues that we're really interested in, and that we think there's a lot of opportunity to start ventures in, but not necessarily a lot of activity happening.
So those are a couple example of kind of the companies we create. To the question about business model, for the first 3.5 years of INVANTI, the business model we always said was the beg, borrow, steal, save method. We did not have a sustainable business model at all. So we funded those first 2 cohorts where we were actually paying people. We raised a little bit of non-dilutive funding, which is a fancy way to say grants, free money, basically from economic development organizations who cared about kind of spurring entrepreneurship, and specifically the kind that we were talking about. And then the other half came from Dustin and I doing kind of consulting work on the side, teaching and doing a few workshops and things like that. So it was very shoestring budget, to say the least. We had a very eclectic first office that was not very fancy, but we loved it dearly, but definitely did not have a sustainable business model those first few years. Our goal was really, nobody believed us. Like you guys would have laughed if you'd been in some of these rooms. We go to a bunch of people in South Bend. We say, hey, listen, we have this idea. We are going to pay people to move here, and then before they have ideas, and then we are going to help them come up with ideas. And everyone was like, you are crazy. Like early stage entrepreneurship is already risky. And you guys are saying you're going to go like even earlier, even riskier. It'll never work. People will never move here. You'll never be able to help them come up with ideas.
And you're going to do it for social problems.
And you're going to do it for social problems. You can't make businesses out of solving social problems. That's what nonprofits are for. So our goal was like, let's first prove all those people wrong. And then we can try to kind of use the success stories to go build out our eventual business model, which the intention was always to have a fund, which we do have. So we closed our first investment fund over the summer, which lets us invest in some of the companies that come out of the studio. And we can get into later, Melissa, I don't know if it's interesting, some like alternative vehicles that we use that are not straight equity, which means we have a way of getting money back out of these companies we invest in, which does not require them to do this kind of hyper growth VC path if they don't want to. We can also get money out of them if they do take that path. But the idea being giving founders the flexibility to build the companies that they want to. But if that was my only answer to what our business model was, we would have a problem on our hands, which is none of those investments are going to have cash coming back into INVANTI for any time soon, like definitely not for the next couple of years. So then the question is like, how do I pay for my apartment and my food? My landlord does not accept equity in startups. So where is our cash coming from? So we have two other business models now, which we're actually just in the process of spinning up. So the first one is actually a membership model in our virtual studio. So now anybody can join. There's a free tier. And then if you want kind of all of our tools and workspaces, that's just a $30 a month membership. So we have our first few paying members of that, and we're hoping to grow that. And then we also have a white label studio product where organizations who have their own kind of group of people who they want to help kind of develop entrepreneurial side projects. They can basically pay for the studio infrastructure we've built in their own private white labeled environment. So we've sold a couple of those and have a couple more coming, a little bit more than $30 for those. So that is the current business model.
That's great. And so my next question, and I'm going to invite anybody in our audience who wants to start kind of putting some questions into the chat, that, so that we can start, kind of including you in this conversation. But maybe while people are thinking about questions or putting some questions down, could you tell me, you mentioned why South Bend and you talked about kitchen table problems, but one of the things that you've always said to me is that we're not social entrepreneurs, and yet here you are talking to a group of people who are interested in social entrepreneurship and potentially are minor, and many of them are in a social entrepreneurship class right now. And we call this thing, as you well know from this article, solving problems that matter. So could you share a little bit more about that, and then we'll jump into some of our questions.
Yeah. So this is like strictly an opinion of Maria and I, and we are not anti-social entrepreneurship or the word social entrepreneurship. But I think from our standpoint, we feel strongly that it shouldn't be a separate bucket. So in some ways, when it gets its own bucket as being over there as social entrepreneurship, a few things happen. One is it can imply that the rest of businesses don't have any social responsibility, which we think is dangerous. Like, we think a core tenet of a good business generally is alignment. So thinking about, what am I doing for my customers? What am I doing for my employees? What am I doing for my investors and other stakeholders, partners, suppliers, things like that? And how does my business model really operate where I'm successful when everybody's successful, as opposed to I'm successful when someone else loses? And so trying to make that a norm as opposed to like a separate thing that's a nice to have as social entrepreneurship. And then secondly, it can ask sometimes weird things of the social entrepreneurship side of things, like, well, if you're doing good, then maybe you don't need to worry as much about your business model. Or if you're doing good, it's just like a nice thing. And so maybe we won't look at them as critically. So I think like one of the reasons we stay away from it and either say like focus on impact or the solving things that matter is really we want to be like, how do you make the type of businesses that we're interested in starting, and I think you're probably all interested in being a part of somehow, like the norm as opposed to an other. And that's like, I think the more that business generally, even if it's not a quote unquote social business with the problem it solves, it can still act in a socially responsible manner with how it treats employees and how it treats suppliers and how it makes money. Like, just, I would challenge you to think about businesses that are out there and just very simply say, like, how do they make money? And what are the incentives because of how they make money? There's a lot of interesting things in the news right now around things like Facebook and how they make money, or Google and how they make money, and what tensions it can start to see because of what that business model incentivizes them to do. So I think, like, we feel really passionately about more talking about, instead of calling it social entrepreneurship, talking about it as entrepreneurship, but then just saying, like, we're going to question things really deeply about the models that are being used.
Yeah, the rules of math don't change when you put a social entrepreneurship label in. So if you actually want to have impact that you care about, you need more money coming in the door than going out.
And that is regardless of if you are a for-profit or a nonprofit.
Yes.
Well, yes, we have that conversation all the time. Doesn't matter if what the prefix is there, it's still, you have to have cash coming in the door. Well, maybe I'm going to switch over to some questions here. I'll go to Andrew first. Hi, Andrew. Nice to see you. But he's asking if you could expand on the selling studio revenue model. And then we'll move on to Tessa's question.
I guess a key element we forgot here is that we built a web app, which is actual, like, digital infrastructure that you can just, like, control, copy, control, paste, sell. So it would basically in creating our virtual studio. So in creating this kind of digital asynchronous environment, we took a lot of what had been in our head. So in our first few cohorts, we had a loose process, but it was delivered entirely through me and Dustin sitting down with people and kind of like coaching them and co-founding them through in a very hands-on way. To move to the digital format and to reach more people, we took what was happening in those one-on-one conversations and turned them into a series of templates in digital whiteboards that include videos and written guides. And then we also, I am not a developer, but over the past year have learned how to, I'm pretty good at the low code stuff now. So I was able to build a web app where our people in the virtual studio can log in. They can do things like log conversations. They can interact with each other and a few other things. So that kind of like package of our workspaces, we call them, with those templates and videos. And then basically the digital environment where people can interact with each other, keep track of projects. That's like the unit that we can then sell as this white label studio.
Would you say the pandemic kind of forced you into this?
100%.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I don't want to lose any of these, the time for questions. So Tess, maybe Tess, do you want to ask your question yourself? I don't want to take, the agency away from you guys, even though I just did from Andrew, sorry. Or not. It's okay.
Oh, I was about to type that I couldn't unmute. Yeah, I'm kind of curious how you went about finding people, particularly, like, especially so in the quit your job and come join INVANTI, but then also more so how you've gone about, like, kind of recruiting people, particularly in South Bend, and how you find people, particularly with these entrepreneurial traits, how you kind of identify them and seek them out.
Yeah. Dustin, you want to hit initiator profile, and then I'll do Maria LinkedIn stalker.
Yeah. So first I'll talk about like what we look for. So we got a lot of pushback on this. Like, how are you going to find people before they have ideas? Like, you judge entrepreneurs by the ideas and how they're working. And our kind of simple answer to that was like, well, before an entrepreneur has an idea, they're still the same person. So like you can find people before they have ideas. So the things we look for, there's 4 main like traits we look for. So the first one we call an initiator profile. So we do look like, do you have a history of starting things generally? So like, do you have this kind of default to action, default to fixing things that bother you or taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves? So we'll look heavily for like, what projects have you been the one to initiate? What clubs, what groups, what, everything from a podcast to an art show to, an actual company to a nonprofit to a board, whatever it may be. Like, where have you showed kind of the wrangling of like, I'm going to take initiative and I'm going to start to like gather resources around this thing I care about. That's number 1. So we look for a history of that. The second thing we look for is more of a kind of a trait, which is, we say, humble but confident. So kind of looking for this idea of you are constantly trying to learn as much as you can. You're constantly trying to get feedback, constantly questioning if you're right or not. And at the same time, you're able to take a lot of ambiguity and still make decisions without perfect information. So you kind of have this always competing two modes where I'm learning a lot. I don't know if I'm right. I'm going to question everything. But also when push comes to shove, I'm able to make a decision amongst that ambiguity. The third thing we look for is kind of like what like interesting skills or experience or like lived experiences do you have that may like well position you to attack an issue you care about. So people have a whole bunch of cool things they've done that they typically don't think apply to entrepreneurship because they don't know accounting. Like everybody hears entrepreneurship and they think finance and accounting. That is like a very small part. It's an important part, but it's a small part of what it takes to start something. So just looking for like interesting life experiences that may give you an edge in starting something, or maybe you have an interesting skill set that you could bring to a problem that hasn't been leveraged there before. And then the final thing is just commitment. So like, is this really something that you care about and something that you're going to like want to spend time on and push through because it can be like really, really hard. So like, do you have some resiliency in those kinds of things? That's really hard to judge, and it's a weird thing to judge. But those are some of the things that we've seen can be helpful, which you'll notice I didn't say like, have you worked at Google, or do you know how to code, or are you a finance expert? Like, sure, those can be great traits too, but there's a lot of different things that can go into what makes you interesting to start a company.
We're going to end with this last question. Anna, do you want to ask your question?
Really, really quickly on the how do we find them?
Okay. Anna needs to unmute anyway, so that's fine.
Okay. A lot of different things we tried. The most successful was like literally sending 300 character free connection notes to people on LinkedIn. So we would run searches that said like, do you have the word founder somewhere in your profile? And then do you have some keywords that indicate that you're connected to a certain problem area or care about something? And that was really successful for us. And the diversity of the people we've worked with is really reflected in this fact that we did not like put out open applications on Twitter and then just like hope that people responded. Because so much of what we've learned is the people who are great at starting things through our process often are not self-identifying as entrepreneurs. They don't look at the white guy in the hoodie in Silicon Valley and say, that's me. So a little tap on the shoulder of like, hey, we think that you could start something. Do you want to give it a try with us? Has been the most successful strategy for us.
Great. Hey, Anna.
Hi. Yeah, I was just kind of wondering about how what kind of tools you offer and how you support those people that want to scale their businesses outside of South Bend, and if anyone that's gone through INVANTI has done so successfully yet, and like what that kind of looks like.
Yeah, so we're still super young. So like our oldest business is like 2 years old. So scaling is not something we've really focused on yet. Like we're still, for a lot of the companies we're working with, like really trying to find the fit of like, what's the business model going to be? What's the product going to be? Who's the customer going to be? So very much in that like pilot or very early revenue days side of things. This is where, to Melissa's first question, I think she asked like, how are we different than like an incubator, accelerator, et cetera. This is where like that difference starts to flip the other way. So like we do try to make sure that we can connect people to people whose expertise is in scaling. It's just like not our expertise. Like we are really on that kind of like, I have no idea what I would start, to like, I have a hypothesis, I'm starting to test it, I'm starting to see like this could be a business. That's like our zone that we think we can be really good at. Past that, there's like other people who understand scaling a business really well. So it's like a job of ours to create a network of people that we can connect people to, should that be something they want to do. And so, for example, we've had like the two companies I mentioned before went on to go into Techstars accelerators, which are much more like positioned to help them kind of like think about what scaling means and how you would do it.
I think it's time for me to say thank you. One thing that I want to clarify and confirm is that just because somebody we don't talk, you don't call yourself social entrepreneurs, but you do have people who come through your process who will start NGOs or nonprofit organizations. It's not to say that they're going to go on to the Techstars or, they're going to go down a different route, but those people are still coming through, learning your process, going through the, kind of trying to understand the idea, and then you'll kind of send them on their way at the end of the program. And
there is no end, Melissa.
That's what I've learned with you guys. All right, I'm going to say thank you. I'm going to share some videos in the chat that Dustin and Maria had shared. One is called Hurry Home, which some of my students have seen before. And another one is with Jess with this new enterprise that she's starting. And then also, may students reach out to you guys?
Sure.
Okay, we'll share your contact information into the chat as well. So maybe
we can get you a beta invite to the virtual studio.
There you go. There you go. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jen, but just say thank you very much to you guys for being with us today. We really appreciate it.
Good to see you all.
Thanks again, guys. Really appreciate it. No. Okay, great. So now we'd like to talk to you a little bit about why we come together in the social entrepreneurship and innovation space. This minor is brand new. We started last semester taking students that are interested in this topic. And a lot of students have felt really comfortable exploring in Melissa's class as well as Mike's class to learn more and more about this topic. Like Dustin and Maria said, it's a new-ish social entrepreneurship and how we see it. And I just want to take some time right now to talk a little bit about the minor, and that it really does. We feel it really does apply to any career, any major. And so we're hoping that the minor is going to be just as flexible working with students. We do have students from different backgrounds that are registered in the minor now. Typically, we're expecting students to have a very flexible schedule or a demanding schedule. Let's say if you're coming in as a business student or engineering student, you have kind of preset and not a lot of space for electives. One advantage of our minor is that you can take the foundational courses and any courses out of order. We feel that they do complement each other, but let's say you haven't been able to get into Melissa's class this spring, does not mean it's a prerequisite for the human-centered design course in the fall. I'm going to put a link in the chat. If you guys have not seen our courses yet, the course descriptions are online. For our fall courses. I'm not going to go into all the details of all of those, but we're excited because we're going to offer 3 classes. Melissa's going to teach one course, the Human-Centered Design for Social Innovation course that's going to be new. I'm going to be excited because I get to help out with that class, so I'm excited for that one. And then Mike Morris is going to be teaching 2 classes he did teach last fall. That's our SEI 30999 and SEI 40999. Poverty, Business, and Development was previously, and the other course was previously listed as a KSGA class. So if any of you guys have seen that, it's the same class. But now because we have the minor all good in registrar's office, it's now got the subject code of SEI. So if you're looking for courses, because course registration is going to come soon, you can look up SEI and you'll be able to find us that way. But the Poverty, Business, and Development course, Mike can speak a little bit about this if you'd like, Mike, but I feel that it's really interesting because it looks through a different angle or lens of social entrepreneurship through development and the role that business can play and should play, conversation there, within development, and speaking to his strengths within entrepreneurship as a way out of an adverse situation. And then the consulting class, consulting and development, is going to cover our our capstone class. And that is really interesting because you get to do a lot of practical hands-on once you have a structured environment of what is consulting and what does consulting mean to a person who is disadvantaged or an organization that is trying to help other people. And then you actually get to work and be assigned with a group within South Bend, either for-profit, not-for-profit, or nonprofit, within the network that Mike has been working really, really hard to create. And from last fall, students really, really enjoyed the applicability of that class. And then in the spring, as you guys know, the social entrepreneurship course is offered. And then as well, Mike teaches a course in marketing. And that one also has a very practical aspect to it. So if you get the practical and flexible, that's what you should remember about the minor. It is, we want it to be very applicable to your career path as well. So the electives, you need 6 credits. We're very open to which courses those are. And we do have some listed on the website as far as what we believe fits very nicely into the social entrepreneurship or business or sustainability or poverty. And so Mike's courses, the poverty, the SEI 30999 covers poverty, business, and development. And then the marketing course, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head right now, but that one also covers an elective course within the minor. I will say one more thing about the minor, that there's some benefits to be registered in the minor. And then I'll let Mike talk about some other opportunities on campus. If you're hungry for some more social entrepreneurship activities, he's going to talk a little bit about that. But the benefits are great, like having these kind of events. We're hoping to have a mix of not just speakers, but maybe networking events with local entrepreneurs, bringing in different speakers to talk to us about different topics. But also we're hoping to build kind of this ecosystem of entrepreneurs that care about doing good things within their community, solving problems that matter. So that's hopefully also a benefit. And the third benefit that I'll mention is we give preferential consideration for any Pulte Institute student fellowships. So a social entrepreneurship project, or working with the 2 organizations that Mike will touch on in the summer, will get preferential if you're in the minor. So lots of stuff. Please check us out online. And then if you wanted to register in the minor, all you have to do is just reach out to me and have a short 20-30 minute conversation of how the minor kind of fits into your schedule. I talk really quickly. I didn't want to waste anybody's time, but please let me know if you guys have any questions. If you want, you can put them in the chat. And Mike, if you'd like to talk a little bit about our other fun opportunities in at Notre Dame, but specifically what we work on with social entrepreneurship, that'd be great.
Am I unmuted? Yeah. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I think just on the minor, before we leave it, it's 18 hours, and it's not just flexible in the sense that Jen mentioned, but in addition to the courses we teach, you can take courses across the campus that deal with environmentalism or poverty or other social kind of problems, and that's kind of the cool angle to the minor. Important to the minor, but important to everything we do, including these courses, is a huge emphasis on experiential learning, or learning by doing. And I think one of the most important questions when students graduate is, apart from a degree, what experiences do they have? And what we encourage is that students build what we call an experience portfolio. So when you finish whatever degree program you're in, you know, what internships, what study abroad, what community engagement, what other kinds of experiential opportunities have you afforded yourself that have built your sort of toolkit. And so just like an artist has a portfolio of his or her work, a graduate should have a portfolio of these experiential opportunities. And we have a bunch. The mention of the Poverty and Entrepreneurship program here in South Bend, which is now in 6 cities and is about to be in 10 cities around the country. And so opportunities to work with poverty entrepreneurs and people from disadvantaged, formerly incarcerated people, refugees, women from the women's shelter who are trying to start things. That program, the Entrepreneurship and Adversity program, there are volunteer opportunities, there are consulting opportunities, opportunities to interview some of these folks, to do case studies on them, to work with the database that we're building to track these folks over 3 years, to write policy papers. We also have an experiential opportunity in South Africa, 6 weeks in the summertime, where students work in the shanty towns or townships outside of Cape Town. It's a beautiful place, but These are historically disadvantaged entrepreneurs, and students get just amazing hands-on experiences in a vexing and challenging but fascinating environment. We have a number of internship-related kinds of opportunities. The Pulte Institute's student fellowships provide funding for students to do internships in the summertime with social entrepreneurs and development professionals. We have something called the Virtual Social Entrepreneurship Core, where there are 3 summer sessions and 5-week community consulting programs. There's one happening in Guatemala, for instance, so the global experience working on social problems. There was mentioned that it's the Pulte Institute and the McKenna Center. We have over 40 students get jobs working in the Pulte Institute or McKenna, but working on cool stuff related to, so we've launched something called the Global Partnership for Poverty and Entrepreneurship. There are a bunch of neat USAID projects in places all over the world, Bangladesh, South America, Africa, where students get to actually get immersed in these research projects. So it's a exciting mix of ways to do real stuff, get real hands-on experience, and learn by doing.
So I think that was great. I really appreciate all the students that have been here. Mike and Melissa, thank you for kicking us off for the first event. And do any of the students, while you're here, have any questions about the minor or the structure? Corey was nice enough, our colleague Corey, who's behind the scenes, put some links in the chat about the opportunities Mike was talking about. And really, we have a general, for Pulte, we have a general like list or interest form that students fill out that Mike was talking about for students to get involved in the work at Pulte as well. Anybody have any questions about the minor or get involved in these activities? No. Okay. Mike, Melissa, anything last? Oh, Lauren?
Is social entrepreneurship only offered in the spring, or is it offered in the fall as well?
It's a great question.
Right now it's offered in the spring. We're talking about if we will need to start offering it both semesters. But as Jen mentioned, because you don't have to take one before another, you can take the human-centered design and social innovation course in the fall, and then catch up on the social entrepreneurship class in the either that next spring, or if you're going abroad, a following spring. But we're taking it under consideration, but we've got to have a few more minors before we begin to offer it twice a year.
Thank you.
We have a question about the summer fellowships, if they're open to graduate students. Yes, we do, not spouses at the moment, but we do fund in the sense that we are open to receiving applications from graduate students. We do have priority for undergrad, but it really depends on the number of applications we get that year and our funding that's available. So graduate students are welcome to apply. Mm-hmm. Awesome. So if any of you guys want to, this will be recorded and sent out to everyone who registered. So feel free to send me an email if you had any questions about the minor, or if you would like to be registered in it. I've had several conversations where people are like, I'm not sure if I can fit it in my schedule, and talking about courses they've already taken, if they fit into the minor already. We're definitely open to that. So there's not a lot of paperwork or hindrance for you to speak. So thanks again so much for coming, everyone. And I hope everyone has a good evening.
Thanks very much, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.